listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin. To master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Once you walked in a forest of splendor in which everything you did and everything you thought was aligned. It is possible at this time to begin to return to the old knowledge. Intuitive healer and manifestor Julia Griffin is here to talk about this unique time in history when all sentient beings, animals, plants, trees, and the earth are intent on creating this change. The wolves awakened her to the most incredible light, which opened gifts and brought knowledge that she longs to share. You are creators, and you are born to be creators of beauty, possibility, and joy. Join Julia on into a beautiful and magical world where amazing possibilities exist. Let us help open the door. The Power of Inspiration and Awakening with Julia Griffin starts right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Griffin, and you're listening to The Power of Inspiration and Awakening on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour and let us help you experience a higher vibration and a new state of mind. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I spent 10 years living with wolves, and I could hear them talk the same way I'm talking now. And they taught me all kinds of things about the universe and how to hear people's thoughts and animals and plants. And that's what I help people do, is hear their inner voice, because that's really how we come to all this, is through our heart and our inner voice. We have a wonderful guest today, Freddy Silva. Let me tell you about him, and then we'll start talking about his incredible new book. Freddy Silva is a best-selling author and leading researcher of ancient civilizations, restricted history, sacred sites, and their interaction with consciousness. He's also the leading expert on crop circles. He's published 8 books in 6 languages and produced 14 documents. His most recent book, which I've read twice since Saturday, is Portals, Energetic Doorways to Mystical Experiences Between Worlds. If you've ever been between worlds, his book is definitely the guide for you. Described by some CEOs as perhaps the best metaphysical speaker in the world right now, he leads sellout tours to sacred sites worldwide, and for 2 decades, he's been an international keynote speaker with notable appearances at the International Science and Consciousness Conference, the International Society for Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, and the Association for Research and Enlightenment, in addition to appearances on Gaia TV, History Channel, BBC, and radio shows such as Earth Ancients, Fade to Black, and Coast to Coast. You can find him at invisibletemple.com. So welcome, Freddy. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hello, Julia. I'm not the only one that talks to wolves. I'm good to hear that there's good company.
Well, actually, and I'll get to this later, the way that I had just an amazing experience at a sacred site was with 2 wolves at a sacred site. And they definitely opened up that portal. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I watch people running away from them, and I'm the only person standing in front of them going, let's have a conversation. So I knew I wasn't crazy.
No, of course not. It's just that they're very particular about who they like. So I would call that
Exactly.
high praise. So why don't you begin by telling us what a portal is and how you find a portal and how they relate to sacred spaces?
Sacred spices. Now that's a good conversation.
Well, I guess they are pretty spicy if you just want to get down to it.
Like sacred spices. I'd never thought about that one. No, a portal technically is a place on the landscape where the laws of physics behave a little bit differently to how we understand them. The universe is essentially one big electromagnetic frequency with little gravitational hotspots everywhere. So when you're walking along the land and suddenly you feel that the rhythm of the landscape is a little bit different. You're standing on a portal because your body's made of exactly the same stuff. And our ancestors knew this very well because they were much closer to the landscape than we are today. And in fact, I hope you have a great way of describing this in a very non-technical terms. Excuse me, I'm going to blame the humidity for my voice today. They talked about their creation myth, how in the beginning, when the creator makes the earth, it creates humans. And then the creator tells one of the humans to go to the South Pole with a drum, which is great advice when you're going to the South Pole. Just take a drum with you. And he gets to the South Pole and he starts hearing the heartbeat of the Earth Mother beating. And he starts beating a rhythm on his drum. And when the two rhythms become synchronized, it says that the earth becomes abundant and it shoots these life streams of force to the surface and the earth becomes abundant with life. But they said some places were more abundant with this energy than others. And they described them as the spots of the fawn. It's a lovely phrase, really, really
It is.
beautiful phrase. And it's something that NASA also picked up in 2008 when they took some satellites up into space, costing millions and millions of dollars. And they found exactly the same things, and they actually call them the magnetic portals, and how they open from the face of the earth about every 8 minutes, and then they link to the sun and possibly way beyond that, which is something ancient people already knew about. And along this long journey of discovery of the human race, we forgot to sense these places on the landscape. And so along come the wisdom keepers, and they said, well, this is not going to bode well for human consciousness because the whole point of having a portal is to thin the veil between us and the next radio station on the
Right.
dial. So we're going to build temples to mark the location of where these places are. So when you can't figure out through your own knowledge and in a knowing where the portal is, you can go to an ancient place of power, a sacred site, and so forth. A pyramid is a great example. Stonehenge or Avebury Stone Circle, great examples. And in there, you go to the unique place called the Holy of Holies or the altar, as they have in Gothic cathedrals. And if you stand there, you basically connect with another level of reality, or as we call it in very technical terms, you get the tingly winglies. And
Hmm.
literally, it feels like a sort of a sensation on your skin when everything that's electromagnetic in your body starts basically intertwining itself with another level of reality and ranging itself to a new frequency. You start getting that sense that something's going on around you. You may not be able to explain it, but you can certainly feel it under the right circumstances.
Yeah, and you say portals are everywhere. You have one in your apartment, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and it's funny how the people that do this work, whether they're healers, writers, or all kinds of people who work with the environment, we're either drawn to buildings where these things already exist, or they already attract the energy to the place where they exist. And I found this in every single occasion. It's as though we're subconsciously connected to these things, and we are feeding the grid, and the grid feeds off us. So it's a two-way relationship. It's a bit like watering a plant because these things don't work by themselves. You got to give them attention and intention. And the more water you give these portals, the more they work on your behalf. So it's like making your life on Earth a little bit easier. And it turns out that this building originally was on a Abenaki sacred site here in Maine.
That's fascinating. One thing I'm going to ask you about, and this is sort of odd, but it's, I guess, happened since I was 17 or 18, but living in Atlanta, there were 3 or 4 parts of the old city that if I stepped on them, I traveled back in time, like into medieval England or into something else. And if I was with someone else, they would have that experience with me. And then I would think, oh, I don't live here. What am I doing here? And pop, I'd go back. It's like maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes.
It's nice, isn't it? I mean, you just follow the places where the ancient people used to go. And just because there's a city on top of these old locations doesn't mean that their energy is depleted. In fact, I was having the same conversation with someone in New York the other day, and they were lamenting the fact that, oh, I have to travel so far up the Hudson River, go to the Catskills. I said, no, no, no. All you have to do is go to Central Park, and there's a glacial erratic there, and you'll know where it is because all the rocks have been scratched by the friction from glaciers. And there's a hotspot right there. And it's a place where people naturally gravitate to. And within minutes, you're away with the fairies because it happens to coincide with one of these hotspots. And another one is where the Scottish Rite Freemasons put up this enormous obelisk that they took from Egypt and they placed it behind the Metropolitan Museum. And it's there for a reason because these are the same people that tap into the very things we're talking about here. They had a very unique understanding. In fact, one of the last people in the world to actually gain this understanding and maintain it for our lifetime. So they placed it there for a very good reason. So yeah, even a coffee shop sometimes. There's one down the road from me where I know the lady that runs it, and I said, "Did you choose this building to put your business because of the money, or because it was a main thoroughfare through Portland, or because of something else?" And she goes, "Well, the first two were obviously business considerations, but there was something about the feel of the building." I said, "Yeah, that's why I come here too. I know the coffee is great, but there is something under the building." So just because you've got modern buildings doesn't devalue the fact that you're standing on very hollowed ground.
Right. And I guess a lot of cities and places are built on top of those energies because people are attracted to them.
Oh yeah, I mean Cincinnati. If you go to the corner of First and Main, that's one of the biggest mounds in America. There's no one buried in these places. Most of the mounds, at least 80% of them that have been excavated, no one's buried in them. So why we call them burial sites, I don't know. But that's where a lot of the Alawani, who are one of the oldest people in this part of the world, used to put their sacred sites, and it became the building that was a foundation for Procter and Gamble. Whether you want to sort of think of it as a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But there was a lot of people that were working within industry that also did put their buildings and their corporations on top of these ancient places because they knew what it was possible to do.
Right.
It really depends on who's living there at the time. So sometimes, like Washington, D.C. is a great example. It's built on the same principles and rules as Luxor in Egypt. Now, you can argue that the fact that the country's not going in the right direction, but it really depends on who's in charge of the White House or or the Senate or Congress, because those places are uniquely placed on the landscape to energize the country. So it's the will of the people that are in those buildings that define the direction of the current and where it goes. Energy doesn't really give a damn one way or the other. It's neutral. It's where you take the intention that either accentuates who you are or it destroys things. So you've got to be very careful when you're working with these portals because there is a sense of responsibility that comes with this, and the side effects can be very pleasant for everybody, or they can be very detrimental.
Yeah, because I know the biggest time that I had, and it's a place in the woods up in the mountains called Skeena, place of the spirits, and it aligns with Orion, just as you wrote in your notes. And it's also on a quartzite outcropping, which makes it something of an antenna. A pendulum will spin counterclockwise, and of course GPS won't work. Um, but with the people I was with, I had this most profound experience. And then when we talked about it afterwards, I thought they didn't go with me. They
Yeah,
had some experience, but they stayed where they were.
yeah, and I think it's also your subconscious also picks that up because sometimes some people just don't want to be changed or they don't want that interaction because they're afraid. The worst thing you can take into these places is fear. It'll just amplify what you're taking in them. And it goes back to what I was saying about being prepared and your intention. There are people who would go to these mystery schools to interact with these special places on the land, and they would take up to 3 years to understand how to work with this stuff. And the first thing you learn is you got to control your fear and you got to control your emotion or energy in motion, which is a great word. So once you got that under control, you can basically slip into the other world, go there for a lengthy period of time and retrieve information and apply it in your daily life, which is one of the big reasons why our ancestors did it. It was whether to check what the crops were going to be doing a year from now, whether we're going to get rain or drought as a practical element, or for the biggest part, it was our own spiritual development. So this is why we've built these places to last into our lifetime, sometimes using ridiculous sized stone, like 400 tons for one single standing stone in France. But it packs a big punch. I mean, all you have to do is stand around the perimeter of it, and it can actually knock you over if you do ceremony. And in fact, one of the stories that I put in the book was of one of those examples where we had a group of 16 people, and it took 16 people to hold hands to go around the girth of the stone. And that gives you an idea how big it was. And it wasn't even the biggest one in France, by the way. And one guy sits it out because he was a bit afraid and he said, "Well, my Catholic upbringing." I said, "Okay, that's cool. Sit it out." And he was happy. And we were doing some ceremony with tone to the stone to get the sense of the resonance. And I heard this thud behind me. I remember thinking, that's going to hurt. And we finished, and I measured the energy field before and after the ceremony, and it had doubled. And the location where the guy had been sitting out the ceremony, he was now flat on his back. And I helped him up and I said, "What happened to you?" "Oh, there's a moment where you hit this note and the stone, it's almost like a hand just moved this way, like a wave, and it knocked me flat on my back." and I showed him the dowsing response right at the edge of the perimeter of the energy field that we had expanded. It hit him like an invisible wave, and it knocked him right over. And after that, you couldn't get him to stop going to sacred sites. He completely forgot about his Catholic upbringing, and he couldn't get enough of this. So it just shows that you have to be prepared, and your subconscious has to be comfortable with what you're doing because it's not going to push it upon you.
Well, I figured with two wolves, nothing was going to happen to me
That's a good preparation.
because they give you this tremendous psychic protection. And I would think, well, I don't know if I can deal with this or not, but I think they can. But it was
Yeah.
really amazing. I mean, everyone at least saw what I saw, but it was very much a goddess female experience with that deity talking.
Oh, I believe that once upon a time, before we started hunting wolves and other animals, and I mean, a lot of the stories from the ancient people around the world when they interacted with the gods, and I mean physical people, they're just
Right.
like us. In fact, they describe them as human-like, but not quite human. They're just not from around here. They were vegetarians, which would make me a terrible candidate for a god because I'm a meat eater, but I also eat vegetables. But there was a time when we did not eat animals at all. And I go to New Zealand quite regularly where they don't have any reptiles. Which is a great thing because I really don't like reptiles. But I have birds that actually come up to me and they land on me and they just sit there talking. I have parrots that sit there and you can hear them communicating in this subconscious thing. And you have this wonderful conversation. I sit on beaches and penguins come out of the water and they look at me and they flip their wings and they go,
Mm.
"No, what are you doing on my beach?" And they waddle over. They're not afraid. And you're having this subconscious communication in English, of course. And it's wonderful. A sea lion pops out of the water, yawns at me, and says, "I'm just going to sit down next to you and have some sleep." And I said, "Okay, knock yourself out." No one's afraid of anybody else. And does show that we were once so connected to the invisible landscape that we didn't need to build anything. It was right there. It was tangible. And we can use these as I call as self-help centers when we forget who we are, where we come from, or what we're doing here.
Because it's such an intense experience that it just completely overrides your ego and your belief system. That's one of the most incredible things about it to me.
Exactly. And it's part of that sort of conscious co-creation that we have with everything living thing on the planet. I mean, think about for a second that the guy who invented the lie detector test originally began the experiments by attaching these electrodes to plants and walking, 5 miles away up in uptown Manhattan while the laboratory was somewhere else in New York. And he would sit down on the park bench and recorded a moment on his watch where he would think a loving thought and he would transmit the thought back to the plants in the laboratory. And in the laboratory, there'll be a scientist looking at the plants and then actually register a signal in the plant that they had received a thought from the main team leader who was 5 miles away. So it does show that everything is very interconnected.
And how cosmic we really are.
Absolutely. We are the gods we're waiting for.
Yeah. So, you have lots of different things, like or if I remember correctly, of the stones were for astrological things. Some were for meeting the green man or a female deity. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, originally the stones chosen for sacred sites weren't just chosen willy-nilly. There were people who were specific involved in understanding the energy of the stone, and the one description from the Pacific says that they could shape the stone without breaking its spirit. So they're very careful as to whether they would shape stone in order to generate a certain effect in the temple. And as time goes by, we began to lose that connection yet again, even though the stones retain the information in the quartz in the stone. The stones are piezoelectric. So the Great Pyramid, for example, it's 1 million tons of quartz, which makes it a wonderful electrical device, and it records everything. So you don't take your problems in there. You've got to go into a very neutral state, and then you can pick up information. So sometimes people, like the groups that I work with, we have to go and clean the mess that people leave behind as in tourism. And then before we can get the groups in there to do some more conscious work. So these places are very, very sensitive. But over time, and specifically in Europe, when the Catholic Church began to dominate everything and they destroyed the temples, sometimes they would incorporate the old stone circles into the buildings, or they built their churches on top of the old sacred sites. Well, it became a bit of a problem for lay people to understand where the energy hotspots were. So the stonemasons did them a favor by starting to carve serpents in the middle of the nave or in corners of the building, which is very strange considering what the Bible tells you about snakes. And so it was to tell people this is where the serpent energy is, because the serpent energy is the way that electromagnetism flows through the land. So it tells you that that's where you stand to get that sort of tingly wingly feel in your system. And when that fails, because the church, it takes them a bit of a while to figure out what's going on in their own homes. But it took them a while to figure out that, hey, wait a minute, we can't have these serpents all over the building. So the stonemasons changed the tone and they began to carve the green man, which is this image of this wonderful being with foliage coming out of all of his orifices. And he's usually surrounded by oak leaves. And they thought, oh, okay, looks like a very nice image of some guy surrounded by foliage. Okay, we can carve a few more of those. Well, they did. There are more images of the green man in churches in Europe than images of Jesus. Figure that one
Wow.
out for a second. And it was to tell you exactly where the pathway of the energy would flow through the building. So places like Mont Saint-Michel in France, if you don't know where you're going and you're having a particularly bad hair day and you can't sense the building and where you're going, just look up at the columns or the corners of rooms, and the green man is right there. And you keep following it, and you go to the original altar, and that's where the hotspot and the portal is in that building.
What a beautiful mystery.
They were very clever, weren't they?
Yeah, that you
You
would
learn to live
follow those
on the
things.
day. Yeah. And today we use myth and other stories to try and tell you what exactly is going on in the land. So the story of Arthur and the Holy Grail is a retelling of the story of Jason and the Argonauts. It's a retelling of the story of Isis and Osiris, where the initiate goes into the other world through a portal, connects with the divine bride, marries her, and he becomes greater than the sum of his parts because she represents the wisdom in the other world. That's what the woman with the black skin represents. So they become one, and in the same, they become one with the universe. They come back resurrected from the dead was the phrase, and that was 4,000 years before Jesus ever showed up. So it tells you how old these traditions really are. But the things that they all have in common is that they source these hotspots of energy in order to bring out the best in themselves and to remind themselves that, to be incarnated in the physical body is a spiritual death. And we go through all the trouble of reading books and watching Gaia and going to conferences and listening to podcasts to give us the tools to do what we're supposed to do. And so there's nothing really new in that respect. We're just bringing out the information in a new way for a new audience. And to this very day, we have the same stories written as Star Wars, which is the same story as Arthur and the Holy Grail.
Mhm.
If you just pick the story apart, it's all about the redemption of the initiate who falls into the dark side, comes back to the light at the end. So there's nothing really new in that respect. So all of these people are going around the planet, leaving us these little clues so that we can maintain our spiritual integrity.
Well, it's a pretty big clue when everything says the same thing.
Pretty much so. But I mean, it's like you have to just keep changing the story to appeal to a new audience. I mean, I used to be in advertising for many years, so I understand that. You can't advertise the same kind of baked beans to someone in Louisiana as you can to someone in the Ukraine. It's a
Right.
completely different paradigm. So you have to think of these different subtleties in order to get the message across. But the message does get across, whether it's in a Gothic cathedral, in a stone circle, or in an Egyptian temple. You just have to have your antenna a little bit more open and sort of readily available to receive information that you may not understand at the beginning, but it will sink in at some point because it's not the image that's important, it's the energy that's important. And since you're
Mhm.
electromagnetic and we're talking about an exchange of electromagnetism, that information seeps in into your body. And before you know it, you're having strange dreams, weird coincidences, and yeah, you're there. And some people get there quicker than others. So that's the only thing to watch out for.
Well, I know that when we went there, it was on the winter solstice and it was so cold. It was about, I don't know, 15 degrees in the mountains. And so, I mean, I'm cold natured. I had on every bit of clothing I could find. And then everything that happened around 9 at night, and I could feel the energy start to dissipate at midnight. And I thought, I'll never go to sleep. It's so cold. At 3 in the morning, it went up to like 68 degrees. And it looked like the most beautiful spring day you have ever seen. So there's this flipping of things that takes place, a flip of a polarity, I think, at these places.
Oh, it does. And it took a whole bunch of electrical engineers to go and figure out what, these crazy people were talking about. And I remember one great experiment at Stonehenge and Avebury, which is the world's biggest stone circle. And they actually plotted these electrodes all over the landscape. And they were trying to figure out what was going on in the land. And they figured out that just like us, the land also goes to sleep in the evening. It gives out during the day. And then the readings of the local landscape, the geomagnetism dies away. And then just before dawn, everything gets attracted to the stones and the avenues and the ditches, and it starts circulating around the ditches, around Stonehenge and Avebury. And just as the sun creeps up over the horizon, they noted that the frequency reached a peak where it actually doubled relative to the frequency in the landscape. And they couldn't understand how that's possible. I mean, there's nothing in nature that we know can double the frequency of the natural land. It's just it just is there. It exists. So something about the design, the placing of the temple and the ditches and the stones relative to each other created these kind of unusual flows of electrons where when the sun finally creeps up over the horizon, a portal opens between two large stones and whoosh, the energy goes into this big crucible on the landscape. And that's why many people like doing ceremony at the crack of dawn. They may not have known this, but they certainly felt that the energy was at its very highest. Which
I think,
coincides with a time when plants also are at their most receptive, which is
yeah.
just at the moment that the sunlight creeps just over the horizon, especially wheat and barley. It makes them very receptive to frequency. So we are picking this stuff up. It's not by accident, and so it's nice to see people and in science finally figuring out what us crazy people were talking about for years.
Yeah, what everyone has been saying that people don't pay attention to. I think it is that the trees exude oxygen 24 minutes before sunrise,
Yeah.
and the birds start singing at the same time. They actually work together to wake up the planet.
Oh, it's wonderful. The Egyptians had a wonderful way of opening up the portals in their temples. They would actually go from room to room and sing as though they're waking a person from slumber. So the room wasn't just a bunch of rocks. It was a living organism, and it goes to sleep at night and it wakes at dawn. So it's a very romantic notion, but now it's also a very scientific notion.
It's kind of cool that it's both. So tell us about some of your experiences. You've had some amazing experiences at these places.
Oh, one or two. And I think that's what kind of
Just one or
led to
two.
the books to be written because I didn't actually want to write anything this year. I've already got 8 books under my belt and I had 16 documentaries. And I was getting a little tired. I needed time off to go and get some more experiences and write from the heart. Because you have to go out and experience this to actually write about it. Sitting here and doing it on the computer and going to the library, it's hard work, but it's a lot easier. But that's not what it's all about. And one of my first experiences was actually, and I should preclude this by saying that I wasn't looking for any of this stuff. I wasn't thinking that all of this stuff that I'm about to say is possible, or that I wanted to feel special because I wanted to have an experience. That's not what it was all about. I was just curious. So when you get levitated in a crop circle and you have the bump on the back of your head when you hit the ground 45 minutes later to prove it, you know you're not making this stuff up. One of my most tangible ones was in the Great Pyramid. The first time I went there back in 2000 with my fearless, glorious teacher, who's an incredible psychic, and she just lets us go and trip over these things, and then she'll say, "Well, that's real, and that's coming from your ego. So you need to sort out the two." It's a great way to learn, by the way. And our job was just to go and clean up the building and the mess that was in the King's Chamber. And the lights went out, and there was 4 of us in total darkness. And as we began to look at complete blackness, we began to tone in the room. And as clearly as I'm seeing you right now, all of these people dressed in white, and they're about 8 feet tall, they came out of the stones and surrounded us.
Wow.
And it was this wonderful, magical moment. And we're still toning and we're still seeing these people. And I've got all these questions that I want to ask them. And before you know it, boom, they disappear back into the stone. And later on, we're completely shocked by this. We definitely saw all of this. All 4 of us agreed that in total darkness, we saw the same thing. We didn't tell anybody. We went out of the building, and there was our fearless, glorious leader. And she says, "Well, wasn't that fun? You honored the building. You did what you're supposed to do. And was it fun meeting the guardians of the building?" And I said, "That really happened?" And she goes, "Of course it did. Why do you think we're doing this?" And that's when it hits home that you have to quit your day job, that there's an invisible universe out there which interacts with you. And if you allow it, it seeps information into you. And that's when I quit my day job and became a best-selling author. And I haven't stopped touring in 30 years. And the information really comes from a first-hand experience. And then I back it up with facts and science to give the people that are sitting on the fence permission to believe that what I'm saying is actually not nonsense, but it's actually true. Because preaching to the converted is easy. Anybody can do that. My job is to bring people into the fold so we can expand our spiritual community and make the earth a much better place than we've left it of late.
hmm I mean, because it definitely connects you to nature. I saw beings too with the experience that I had, and so did everyone else. It was interesting because there was one person who was a watcher, who was like watching everything from the distance. And then I saw a Native American woman who had a lot to say. I'm going to say she was some sort of deity, but I don't want to give it all away. You know how it is. You don't want to tell everything.
I know the Watchers very well. I've been working with them for a long, long time. I didn't know that's who they were, but apparently it was. They also call themselves Shining People, the Shining Ones, because they originally were in physical shape. They had to keep smearing an oil on their skin. They had very light, even paler skin than the Caucasian people. So they smeared an oil like a suntan lotion, and it gave the skin a glowing shine. But it also defined their position as much more intelligent than hunter-gatherers 12,000 years ago, because when you have a certain amount of knowledge, there's a glow about you. There's a certain, demeanor about you.
hmm
So it was a metaphor that actually defined their physical characteristic as well as their mental and spiritual characteristics. So it turns out that those are the people that have been sort of feeding me bits of information, and then I go off and write things and make documentaries. So nice to hang out with people that you had no idea even existed.
hmm I know. I feel the same way. I'm like, wow, someone else has had this experience. But the watcher thing is interesting because everyone could see that immediately. A lot of the things that I saw and heard, other people couldn't, but it was instantaneous with the watcher.
They are fun, and they also appear to have several jobs. And just because you're dead doesn't mean you can't be useful. And I remember working with them in many places in the sites in England where there are certain portals throughout the south of Britain which are particularly connected with them. And I found them again in the South Island of New Zealand, sorry, in the North Island of New Zealand, at a place I hadn't no idea where we were going even. And I remember the group stopping and pointing at something in the woods, and I was pointing over there, going, "Oh, what are you two doing here?" It's like I caught two people smoking behind the shed, at school. It's like, oh, we have two jobs. We also look after this mound here as well. Really? There's a mound here? Oh, there's like a hidden pyramid. Oh. And what are you
Mhm.
looking at? I said, I'm looking at these two guys who also look after a giant's grave back where I live in England. And I didn't realize they had two jobs. And they're saying, well, we have several jobs. You can be in several places at once when you're in the spirit world. I thought, well, that's handy to know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe that's just something that appears when you have those experiences as a watcher. I don't know. But it's
Yeah,
certainly interesting.
they're very benevolent people, and they have been
Mhm.
around in human history. I mean, the Hopi called them the lookers. And I was talking to Clifford Mahuti, who's the late head of the Zuni clan, and he said, "Oh yeah, we call them the lookers." And that wonderful ghost panel that you have in Horseshoe Canyon of those red ochre figures, which are 8.5 feet tall, which is the exact size that they actually were when they were in physical form, by the way. And we have the skeletons in Britain and France to prove this. So these people would dress these incredible tunics, and there's seven of them with one leader who's always the head of the clan, and that happens all around the world. In India there are the seven rishi that are governed by the eighth leader. The Anunnaki had seven leaders plus one, which looks over all of them. And so he was saying, yeah, they still pop around in non-physical form with their flying shields, and you can come sit here on the canyon wall every 3 weeks and hang out with them. No big deal. And they're so matter of fact about it. But they got tired of being crucified whenever they appeared here on the earth. And that's the exact word that they used, because not all humans were comfortable with 8.5 foot tall people, usually with red hair or blonde hair. I mean, they are the foundation of the Caucasian people a long, long, long time ago. And so that's what they looked like. They didn't look like us. We were all much darker skinned back then. But there were many times when people like the Hopi said, no, they were very benevolent people. They helped us through the flood. They got us from a sunken island in the Pacific called Kashkara, and we hopped over all the way over to Arizona. And then when we were here and safe, they kind of went back to where they came from. So they've always been around in the stories of the most ancient people on the planet. And that's why I like listening to what they're saying. This is where the original concept for portals comes through, is to know what they were talking about and how they were mapping these things originally, because it goes back, the story goes back to at least 12,000 years. And in the case of the Aboriginal people in Australia, it goes back 1 million years. I mean, they can remember things
Amazing.
that happened 1 million years ago, and it's provable. There's a valley in the outback which looks like a sort of a dimple, and they said, yeah, there's a meteorite or an earth shaker, as they call it, landed there about 1 million years ago. Well, we don't really keep track of time. And a couple of professors from the University of, I think it was the University of Melbourne, they said, well, let's find out if it's true. It sounds too ridiculous. And they actually did some ground penetrating radar, and they found the rock that made the valley 1 million years ago. And they said,
That's
how
incredible.
did you know? I said, well, we can tell you some even older stories.
Okay, with that, we are going to go to break. So please stay with us. We'll be right back and tell you more fascinating things about portals that you might not hear. If Freddie wasn't here with us and really filling us in on that, it's incredible information. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Julia Griffin with One True Self. You can find me at onetrueself.com, onetrueself.com. I'm with Freddy Silva. We're talking about portals, magical places, how to get cosmic energy, and all these places and what you need to know about them. And Freddie, where can our listeners find you?
Right here.
At invisiblerealms.com.
I had to do that. I had to do that. Invisibletemple.com.
Invisible Temple, see?
It has documentaries, it has books, it has articles. You're going to be there for about a week. Good luck.
I know. I started to look at it and I thought, no, I'll have to come back to this. It's too much information. So, but for people right now, and I know there are plenty of you because you talked to me who are at home being bored and you wish that you could do something or go ahead on your spiritual path, it's a great thing to search through. And so is the book.
Well, thank
So,
you. Yeah, I think that we're sort of ready for this. And again, going back to the conversation with my would-be publisher, and she basically said, look, I'm going to convince you about this book. I said, well, I need convincing because I don't really have anything else to say right now. I just released 2 books in the last 2 years. I mean, people were hungry for information during COVID, and I gave it to them. I mean, there was like 4 documentaries and 2 books. That's a lot of work,
that's a huge
which is
amount of
great.
work.
I hate being bored at sitting at home doing nothing. And so it says, well, you keep talking about these experiences and practical application of working with these hotspots of energy and some of the ways in which you can actually interact with them. And I thought, but you never really written it down. I said, well, that's true. I usually talk about it when we go on tour together, and I take groups around the world and put into practice what I usually talk about. But I never really sat down and actually wrote about it. So I thought, okay, I kind of like the idea because it's practical. And I'm a very practical person at the end of it. I like things to be extracted from, let's say, a temple in the Andes and say, well, how can this be useful in my daily life? It's great to look at. It's wonderful to take photographs and get downloads, but how does it become practical? Well, of course, I take that into a portal and it just expands that question and it sends it back to me tenfold. And before I know it, oh, okay, I see. So you can actually build this in your own life. And I actually been teaching for many, many years how to build your own temple, actually create your own portal, whether it's in your living room or in your lawn, your land, or across an entire city. And I know one guy who did one of my workshops who built one over 50-mile radius over Nova Scotia because he wanted to treat the energy within 5 towns of people who were very sick. And literally
Right.
within weeks, there are people reporting people reporting greater levels of healing going on within this area that's being treated. And I had no idea after all of these years of looking and analyzing these temples around the world, that the information was on a wall behind me at a temple of Edfu in Egypt. And there's the Egyptian god of wisdom, Jehuti, with the ibis head, and he's sitting there like this. And there's all these hieroglyphs, which I can't read, but there was an English scholar that translated the texts. And finally, I was able to figure out what it said. And I thought, my God, for 10 years, I've been deciphering all of this around the world, and the instructions were behind me all along. That's how the gods get their kicks with us mortals. But that's what it became very practical, because if you can't travel somewhere or you don't feel the confidence to use your sensitivity to figure out what these places are, then you can build one for yourself. And some of the feedback that I get from people around the world is extraordinary. I just helped someone build one in South Maine last week. They didn't have the confidence to do it, even though it's available now on video. And they said, well, it's almost like immediate, the effect. They said, yep, and be careful what you ask for when you step through the perimeter of these stones, because you will get it. And sometimes getting what you ask for may have not been the thing that you had in mind. So be very clear with the intention when you go in, because you're working with a living, breathing organism, just like a temple or the altar in an old church or a cathedral. These things are very alive, and they go there and they say, well, what do you want? So you go there with the right intention, with the right frame of mind, and don't expect anything in return, which is one of the most important things when working with this stuff. Don't expect anything. If you do, it'll come from yourself, because you want that need to be validated. That's no use to you whatsoever. So you want to just say, well, what's this about? That's usually my question, because I don't know what I'm doing. What's this about? How can I be a better teacher of these ancient systems of knowledge? I just sit there, listen to the birds, eat a sandwich, and before you know it, notebook is out. I'm getting all kinds of instructions coming from left, right, center. Sometimes it'll be in a dream state, or it'll be a chance coincidence with an archaeologist at a cafe in Cusco in Peru, and we'll start talking about the very thing that I'd been asking. So I start paying attention to these little coincidences. And a week later, I've got enough notes now to write a chapter on something, and it all becomes very practical. And it all comes down to understanding about the soul purpose, or making sure that your life here is much more empowered in a way that allows you to live your life much more aware. So rather than being a victim of circumstance and chance, you can actually engage with the invisible world wherever you are. And the universe is ready to help, by the way. It's not so far away. In fact, it usually says, we're just in the room next door. Okay,
Mhm.
that's what it is. You seem to think that because we're in the invisible universe, it's out there somewhere. No, it's the next radio station along the dial. It's not that far away. But you have to ask for help. We can't intercede in your behalf, because that contravenes the first law of the universe, which is the law of non-intervention. You have to ask
It's also got to be that they give you the answer they want to give you.
Exactly. And you have to fill in the details. They give you the goalpost. You have to fill the details. Otherwise, it would invalidate the reason for being here in the first place, which is the experience.
Well,
Incarnation
yeah, I
experience.
know I had always been intuitive, and the wolves had amped that up so that it had become pretty easy to read animals. And I was like, sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. I wish I were more accurate. Well, like 2 months later, I can remember being at the grocery store and hearing someone say, I'm going to go back and get some Hungry Man meals. Now, why would I pick up on that? I don't eat frozen meals. And I thought, who said that? And I thought, oh my God, I'm hearing their thoughts. And then I could see their auras. And then, I try not to listen because I don't want to intrude. But if someone keeps saying something in their heads or it's about me, I can't help it. I'm going to hear that. Now, if someone wants to change, I can hear their soul, their inner self. But that was just the oddest thing. And it kept getting louder and louder and louder. And so, I mean, it was like I asked, it came.
Exactly. Be careful what you ask for.
Well, I'm
And
glad I
it's funny
did.
because when you work with portals and these energy hotspots, it does accentuate your natural ability. Everybody's psychic. We
Oh,
just get
yeah.
talked out of it by our peers or our parents. It's like, stop talking to fairies, but I can see them, Dad. And you do before you're age of 7. You can see the invisible universe. You still have a foot in the other world. Nothing wrong with that. And some people just develop it naturally. But you're right. I mean, it expands your ability to be much more sensitive. You develop your inner tuition or your intuition.
Yeah.
One of
And
the
it's
tricks that I
it's
usually
more
use with
more like it
people,
comes from your soul with those
it really
kinds of
does.
experiences. It's
Yeah.
not just a guess. I was always intuitive and a lot of times scared my parents because I knew what would happen in the future. So I could see if I said, do you know what's going to happen? They would be like, no, no, don't. So that made me shut some of it down. But then when that happened, it was like it was such a pure energy that I just wanted to go more and more into it.
Yeah. And it's very useful. I mean, you can predict the winning lottery numbers. Of course, if it's not part of your life path to win the lottery and lots of money, and you got to work your way through life, you'll get the numbers. I mean, I've done this so many times. We actually had a joke among our group of how much money we've actually lost this year by getting the numbers, and then something happening minutes before you buy the ticket, and boom, the gates closed, and you left with the numbers, and you haven't bought the ticket. But and some people become great healers because of this ability, and some great psychics as well. But you are right. I mean, I've sort of developed the ability to see right through people, and it is a blessing and a curse because you can judge people very quickly because you can read right through them, and you pick up snippets and you think, well, I'm not sure about this person, but you're judging them a bit preemptively. You should give them a bit of a chance, but at least you know where they're coming from, and it gives you a chance to sort of walk around them and meander like a reed in the wind and avoid the people that you don't want to be around. So it is useful for that respect. And people like Leonardo da Vinci and Plato and Pythagoras actually did this. They did this on a sort of a yearly basis to improve themselves, and that's why they were great people in their own right. Pythagoras couldn't get enough of traveling to these hotspots. He did it 5 times, and it said it shaped his metaphysical doctrine. And here's a mathematician talking about metaphysics. So, depending on what you're looking for, that's the most important thing. You've got to be very focused on what it is that you're trying to expand as a soul, and make sure that your life here on Earth, you make the best time of it. You don't just sit around going shopping and watching television and playing with with this. No, you make the best of your time here, which is why all of these people, these luminaries, did it before us. They said, we got 80 years or so of a time within this physical temple, and I want to make the best of my time here. I want to make the best of my experience. I want all the tools necessary to make sure that I'm working this alive and not dreaming my way through life. I'm actually conscious of what I'm doing all the time. And of course, the proof is in what they accomplished.
I think you're going to know the answer to this. When I was at that Native American PowerPoint, I had a distinct impression that I could slip into a place where people lived forever, and it was physical and it was like our universe, but it was different. And I heard quite plainly, no one ever dies and no one ever gets sick. But my children were small then and I didn't want to leave them. So I came back. Have you had that kind of otherworldly experience?
It's so much fun, isn't it? I mean, I remember going to Shiprock, or Tsebitai in its traditional language, in the Four Corners. It's a big volcanic plug, essentially. You can see it for 40 miles. Looks like a petrified angel, and it's the sacred site of the Anasazi and now the Navajo. And I remember going there for the first time, again, not really expecting anything. I heard about the power of place, but I wanted to feel it for myself. And it's raw power. It's grown men cry at the base of this incredible structure.
No,
And
I can feel it when you're saying it.
oh, it's an
You,
incredible
yeah.
place. And I have to say, I'm on one of them actually. And it was completely still. And I just remember hearing this, could have been Navajo, could have been Anasazi. I'm very connected with the Anasazi for some reason. And I heard this chanting, and I began to walk around in a circle and actually dancing. And I don't dance. I really don't do. I'm very awkward. I'm 6'5". I just don't dance. I'm not one of those people that enjoys that. And I'm just dancing around and uttering in this strange language. And for about 10 minutes, it was just so wonderful. I didn't know what I said. And after that, I thought, I feel like I'm just totally immersed into the mountain. I'm
Hmm.
just, and there's snakes everywhere, of course. And
Yeah.
I hate snakes. I have a cobra phobia. The worst place to be is in like desert Southwest, and snakes everywhere. I don't really care. I am completely immersed in the spirit of place. I know it's protecting me, and I know I've merged with it, and there's no differentiation between the rock and the soil and myself. It was a wonderful waste of 4 hours. I thought I was there for 50 minutes. 4 hours later, I got a nice suntan to prove it. But yeah, it was a connecting with the spirit of place, and I learned more about the tradition of the sacred cave up on top of Sebitai, which the initiates would go on their 17th birthday, and they'd go out of body for 3 days, come back, and they become a risen one. So long before Christianity coined the phrase. And it occupies a geomagnetic hotspot, that little sacred space up there. So again, they could sense it, and they still do.
That's amazing. So since you know way more about this than I do, tell me a little bit about crop circles. I know in your book you say that some are real and some are not.
Yeah, I mean, it was what kind of got me into this stuff in the first place, and I didn't really realize that the real crop circles are built exactly in the same way as a portal. They're built exactly the same way as a Stonehenge or a Gothic cathedral or as a pyramid. It's just that they use the techniques to manipulate the laws of nature to flatten crop in geometric shapes, which create the very same physiological and psychological effects when you walk into them. Since 2003, there's hardly been any real ones. And we were told this as well. It was a piece of communication. So the man-made phenomena has taken over since then. Um, uh, Sad to say. So if you want to look at the real phenomenon, go back before 1999, and that's where the real stuff really is. And I wrote a book that's luckily my first outing as a writer becomes an international bestseller and still is to this very day. So I'm very proud of that. Yeah, the book hasn't aged one single day, but it's the same thing that I'm talking about here. 30 years later, yeah, if you go into a crop circle, the laws of physics are also rotated in such a way that allows you to go through these sort of tubes, magnetic portals up into the sky and beyond. And yeah, you're away with the fairies in no time at all, and information comes back in as well, and it goes into the earth. So we've had incredible amounts of people, thousands and thousands of case histories of people who've had changes of consciousness, spontaneous healings, even though they don't even believe in crop circles. In fact, they hate the stuff. They're skeptics, and they spontaneously heal. This led to an incredible research into actually transmitting the energy of the crop circles onto healing cards, which are still sell on my website. I've never advertised them, and the stories that I get back from people that use them are out of this world. It never ceases to amaze me what people are using these things for, and that was part of that new technology. So it's the same method, the same group of consciousness that's making this that originally were behind the original portals on the Earth. But they're just getting our attention in a much different way for a different audience, just like Star Wars that we were saying earlier. And you walk in there and boom, if you're attentive and you're open to suggestion, the information comes through you. So some scientists have been used to create new anti-gravity devices, which should have been built in 3 countries, which I can't tell you anything about because they're waiting for the right politically expedient moment to bring this to the public.
Of course.
As you know, people that developed the hydrogen-powered car, they got run over by the vehicle 2 days later after they drove it in Seattle. They got killed by their own vehicle. Funny that. So they're
Yeah.
very aware of the political connotations of anti-gravity and magnetic drive vehicles that are going to wean us off fossil fuels. And that was also mentioned in the early communications with the crop circles back in the 1970s. We just had no
Wow.
idea what we're talking about. So people walk in there just like any portal, and the information comes to them. And if they're open and receptive, boom, it goes into their subconscious. So before you know it, they think that they got the information and they give themselves credit for coming up with these
Right.
wonderful ideas like new mathematical theorems, healing modalities, and so forth. So, yeah, it's just like any other portal. It's just that, again, we forgot for the last 2,000 years where they are and how to build them and how to construct them. So now the watchers, because that's really who is behind the real crop circles, they're putting them back on the landscape to remind us that there's still magic going on all around us.
There is. There's magic everywhere. And thank you so much for being with us and telling us about it. Let's tell everyone again the name of your book and your website so they can find you.
Portals is the new book, and you can find all the information at invisibletemple.com.
And you can find out about the invisible world, which makes living in a physical body so fascinating and never boring. So I hope that you'll all be with me again in a couple of weeks. It's been lovely to be with you. And you can find me on my website, One True Self, ONE, trueself.com. Thank you. And Freddie, thank you so much for being with us. Namaste.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Inspiration and Awakening Radio with Julia Griffin to master a higher frequency for a new state of mind. Join us next time as Julia takes us deeper into the memory of the moments of light where transcendence and enlightenment emerge. The memory of the jewel of consciousness is always lived within you to tap into waves of energy and create huge changes by imagining the beauty of the vision and desires that are hidden in the heart. Learn to find your way back to nature, beauty, and your own heart, which holds the secrets of your existence and future. To discover more about Julia's adventures, animal communication, and the teachings she brings to every show, visit onetrueself.com. That's onetrueself.com. That's ONE, trueself.com.